In June of 2003, Corporal Jeff Edwards was serving as a grunt in Iraq with 2nd Platoon Kilo Company 3rd Battalion 23rd Marines, a reserve unit activated out of Memphis, TN. For most of the Marines, this deployment would serve as their first true taste of active duty life. Such was the case for Corporal Edwards. The battalion was placed in Al-Qud, Iraq, and was primarily tasked with security and follow-up given the recent fall of Baghdad. Corporal Edwards often said that if they made a movie about his unit's deployment, that it would be a comedy long before it would be an action movie. However, for Corporal Edwards, a series of misfortunate events would lead to a surprising journey throughout Iraq. After returning from a recent patrol, Corporal Edwards began to experience sharp pains in his side. The debilitating pain led to a visit from the corpsman, and late one evening in June 2003, it was determined that Corporal Edwards was experiencing appendicitis. He was subsequently loaded up on a Black Hawk medevac in the middle of the night and ferried to a MASH-style Air Force hospital at Talal Air Base outside of Nasiriyah. On the ride over, Corporal Edwards thought to himself how lame it was to exit war due to appendicitis, and his one deployment was set to end with little fanfare. Once he arrived, the docs watched closely, and it was determined it was not appendicitis. Corporal Edwards had some scarred intestinal area from a surgery he had as an infant, and this was determined to be the source of the pain. After a couple of days, Corporal Edwards recovered, though he had no word from his unit as to next steps. Now, living as a Marine in Al-Qud was not for the faint of heart. Sleeping on the concrete, no showers, and of course, the infamous crappers filled with the mix of diesel, feces, and flies. Here at Talal Air Base, the Air Force had showers, hot chow, PX, cable TV, and more. For the next few days, Corporal Edwards was digging his new accommodations. However, after 5 days and no word from his unit, Corporal Edwards feared he was about to be sent home. That's when Corporal Edwards stumbled across one Marine SSGT Garcia from 8th Engineers. Edwards couldn't recall the exact unit of Garcia, but since every single unit in the Marine Corps has a Garcia, we'll just move on. Garcia was heading north to the town of Al-Diwania and offered to take Edwards north. Seeing as how this closer to his unit, Edwards jumped at the opportunity to hitch a ride. SSGT Garcia told the hospital that he was taking me, and without so much as any discharge paperwork, Edwards was on the road. Once they arrived at Diwania, the Marines there were using a local university as a staging ground for multiple units. Edwards began to make the rounds and see if anyone was heading to Al-Qud. He came across a gunnery sergeant who appreciated his efforts, and the gunny joined him in finding a ride. That's when they came across some bulk fuel Marines heading to Al-Qud that night on an overnight trip. Edwards jumped in with the bulk fuel Marines and arrived back in Al-Qud that morning. When Edwards reported into his unit, he was told that the battalion thought that he was in Germany getting his appendix out. In fact, the Marines of 2nd Platoon had already ratted through his gear and took what they could because, as we all know in war, gear adrift is a gift. Edwards explained where he had been this whole time, and while the battalion commander later reported he was pissed that the battalion lost a Marine, he was genuinely impressed that the Marine hitchhiked his way back into the fight. Edwards was welcomed back into 2nd Platoon, and though he spent a brief time with Headquarters Platoon, he would eventually end the war back with his beloved 2nd Platoon. Though, when he returned to 2nd, he no longer had to oversee one of the infamous Four Horsemen Marines. But we'll save the story of the Four Horsemen for another day. Here at Document War, we're dedicated to preserve all the stories of war, from the mundane, dramatic, field talk, and more. If you have a war story you want preserved here through the power of AI, email your story to documentwar03@gmail.com. As long as it's true to the best of your memory, we'll get it live at Document War.